think everyone here knows Bob Jackson. To introduce Bob Jackson to this group is probably redundant. Bob has been involved with Murray State a long, long time, beginning as a student in a variety of staff positions, including a very successful tenure as president or head of the foundation and government relations. And he now is the president at a challenging time for all universities, I think, in terms of funding challenges, enrollment challenges. It's probably not the best time to be a president, but I think Bob's a good man for the times. So and his two co-authors were unable to be with us today because of scheduling issues, but now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Jackson.
Dr. Mulligan, thank you, and I'm glad to see all of you. Some of you I've known for a long, long time. I know most everyone in here pretty well, and look forward to any questions you may have. I've got a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to walk through, but in regard to Bill's comments, I appreciate that, and I learned a long time ago, you don't get to choose your time, time chooses you. So I didn't know in 2018 when I accepted this job, we'd have a 24-month or so pandemic. May not have taken it, probably wouldn't have. But things are going well. This university is a special place, as I say often, and it's my alma mater. Some of you are my former professors in my Department of Econ and Finance. And so I have a long and wonderful history here. And a lot of professors and deans are here, and I appreciate you taking the time this morning to come out. Jordan Smith's on the front row. Jordan works in our office, and Jordan was one of the co-chairs of the committee that started working on this book in 2019 with me, Dr. McLaughlin, and Sarah Marie Owens. And I want to make sure we give them a shout out. They worked very, very hard. They work in Pogue Library, and Ann, Pogue Library, and the proceeds of this book, the net proceeds of this book, after expenses, go to support Pogue Library. Pogue Library is very, very important to all of us, and Ann in particular. And so that's, we designated those funds there. Jeff and Sarah Marie spent a lot of time and a lot of hard work, and they did a fantastic job. They're not here this morning, but I want to make sure to give them a shout out. So this is very much a collective effort, and we worked together again since 2019 on this book. We got disrupted a bit because of the pandemic, and so we had to slow it down, and then we picked it back up. Chris, I'll try not to walk around much. So I don't know if you're going to follow me, if you're going to put it on your website and use it for another purpose. I'm going to use this copy of the book, and then Dr. Mulligan, as president of the Jackson Purchase Historical Society, this is your copy that I signed with a note to you. I've known Bill a long time, and I appreciate his good work, and so this will be your copy, and I'll leave it for you as well. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes, and you all think of any question you want to ask me. If I can't answer it, I promise someone in here will be able to. There's a lot of great historians in here, Mr. Patterson, as well. I love this picture. So there's a lot of pictures in this book that have never been published before, that others have never seen. And that was one of the things that we wanted to do as we went through this process, is publish items and parts of our history. Every college and university in America has a unique and special history. I think the history of this institution is especially unique, and I will try to hit those points of why I think that, but why are we located here, of all places? How did we end up in Murray, Kentucky, and why? In the far hinterlands of western Kentucky at the time the legislature decided, who decided, how was it decided, and why. So we'll touch on those things. But I love this photo with Colonel Sanders and former President Harry Sparks. Some of you may have attended the Sparks lecture. So I gave the Sparks lecture this year on this topic. So much of what I'm going to say today, if you were at that lecture, you're going to hear it again. And I've talked a lot about this particular book in the last many months. I apologize for any repetition. Dr. Sparks, many of you knew Dr. Sparks. This is when he was president. This is what he did, but I just want to give a shout out because of this photo, which I love with Colonel Sanders in it. 2022 was our centennial year, as you all know. So that's why the book now. This university was founded in 1922, and a shout out to the book committee, Dean Chris Ferguson, who is Dean of Libraries, including Pogue, Waterfield, all of our special collections, Dean over that area, and Jordan co-chaired this initiative. So we had faculty, staff, students, alumni, others help with this project of ideas, things we should touch on, why we should touch on them, before we actually started the research and writing process of this particular book. Bill mentioned University Press of Kentucky. They were fantastic. And they don't just accept any book. They were very excited about this book. It's done quite well for them. It's done quite well for us, and we appreciate it. I mean, again, our alumni and friends and faculty and staff and all the good people at Murray State love the history of this institution as well. So please tell your friends and neighbors to go buy a copy. Proceeds support Murray State. So think about the 20s. So think about and what this area looked like, what it was in the 1920s. We're very isolated. It's very, very rural, especially in the Purchase region. Murray was a small city of about 2,500 people. There were about 20,000 people in the county. So the county's about doubled over 100 years. It's about 20,000, and the state had about 2.4 million people residing in it at that time. So we're a rural area, isolated, in a state where not that different than today. And Jordan and I got back last night from Frankfurt, where we've been most of the week. So if we look like we're a little beat up, that's why. So the legislature's in session, and we're shaking trees. But it's a long way to the center of the state, where the power structure resides and exists. It's 4 hours each way. It wasn't in 1922 and before, and I'll touch on that. There were approximately 87 vehicles per 1,000. Most of those were farm vehicles. There were very few vehicles. The wealthier citizens of this city and county had a vehicle, but you can imagine in 1922, the vehicles that existed, they didn't go very fast. The reason I talk about that is I want people to think about all the trips that we make to Frankfurt, Central Kentucky, throughout this region, recruiting students, and all the things we do, and many of them we take for granted. It took a long time to get everywhere, especially the center of the state. The roads, mostly gravel, some not graveled, very, very few were blacktopped as we know today. Most of those were in the city of Murray, if there was any blacktop even on those particular streets. Train service was very good. I'm going to touch on one paragraph in the book in regard to this early history. Train service, especially going north and south, was very good. That's how many went to Central Kentucky. Paris, Nashville, Louisville, Frankfurt, by train. Some are related to Dr. Rainey T. Wells. He made that trip often. You could drive it, obviously. There just were no bridges. So this was a period of time before bridges. The bridges didn't come until the 30s, and they were part of the Great Depression work, WPA projects and other projects. Egner's Ferry Bridge, which is seen here in this photo, an early photo of I think that photo was taken in the mid-30s. It wasn't built until 1932. So in the introduction of the book, and this is the only thing I'm going to read to you, and hopefully all of you have a copy of it. If not, I hope you go get one. But at the dawn of the automobile age, Murray was a pleasant county seat of a little over 2,000 people, the sort of tight-knit place where everyone knew their neighbors. There were plenty of small businesses on the court square, along with train service to Paducah and Paris, Tennessee. But ours was not the biggest or the busiest town in the Purchase area at that time. It did, however, have one crucial asset that set it apart: an extremely savvy civic booster and longtime champion of higher education, Rainey T. Wells. Later, Dr. Rainey T. Wells. Some called him Judge Wells, a very, very prominent citizen that actually one of Mr. Patterson's relatives. Somewhere in there, I don't know the exact family tree. Others of you may have a relationship too, but I know Mr. Patterson does. At the time, in the early 20s, and I'm going to talk about 1920 especially, that was kind of a pivotal year to all of this history. These were the barriers. The legislature and the governor were worried about the pennyroyal and the Purchase regions, the rural hinterlands of Kentucky. We needed more and better teachers. We needed more and better schools, but we had no place to educate them. And so really everything west of that first blue line was the regions they were thinking about. Really everything west of the Green River for the most part. So we all know where it's located. The other arrow, line and arrow I put on there is it's 265 miles. So just for the record, it's 265 miles from my driveway, both at Oakhurst and County Court. It's a little bit further. It's 266 miles, I think, from the other house to Frankfort. So today it's a 4-hour drive, and that's pushing it. You can make it in 3 hours and 45 minutes, but you're not going to stop for a bathroom break. I assure you of that. But this was what they were concerned about. The legislature and the governor was concerned about at this point in time, about 1920. Who's heard of Horace Mann? Okay. So my doctoral research and a lot of work that I've done over many years is in regard to normal schools or teachers' colleges, that history, and that component of higher education. Dr. Horace Mann was a legislator also. That's a very common theme for folks that were getting these schools placed and open and funded. He was a well-known educator. He was a college president. He's known as the father of the common schools. So teachers' colleges were also called common schools, normal schools. So you'll hear these terms. Basically, they all mean the same thing. So when Murray State opened its doors initially, we were educating teachers. That was our charge. That was our job. So he was in charge of the movement of the common school. He was secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education. But there are school buildings, both K through 12 and in higher education all over this country, that you'll see Horace Mann buildings, Mann Hall, Horace Mann Hall. You'll see that all over the country, so look for that now. There's literally hundreds of them, not so many in this particular region. But post-Civil War, through the early part of the 20th century, was the period of time when we were building common schools, teachers' colleges, normal schools. There are about 272 operating today, public comprehensive universities. Many of them we would call regional universities, but there's 272 of them that are rooted in these normal schools and teachers' colleges, Murray State being one of them. Okay? Most of the comprehensive universities in Kentucky, Northern is not rooted here, Eastern is, Morehead is, Western is. Northern started out as a junior college, a 2-year school, different than our history. So this was rural Kentucky. This was rural Callaway County in particular. This is the Miller School. Mr. Patterson, I hate to keep pointing you out, but he'll correct me if I get too far off on any of this. This was located in Lynn Grove, as I recall, or near Lynn Grove, in that area of the county, the Miller School was. But this was a typical public school in Callaway County at this point in time in our history. They were dotted all over this region, all over this county, and these were our public schools, one-room schoolhouses, right? Probably many of our family members were educated in a lot of these types of public schools. Murray State University would not be here if not for Rainey Thornton Wells. And he was a visionary beyond his time. He really was. Extremely bright. Dr. Ralph Woods called him, described him as dynamic, talented, humane, and far-seeing. And he was all those things and more. I mean, he was a leader's leader. He loved this region. He loved Callaway County. He wanted a school located here. He was worried about public education and education in general. He was worried about our teachers and our children and our future. And he spent a lot written in regard to Rainey T. Wells in these particular areas. There's a lot in this book about Rainey T. Wells also. So he was born on Christmas Day, 1875. And at the young age, he has an interesting history. At a very young age, he started thinking about how can I found a school, and I'm going to touch on that in just a second. He went to Southern Normal School, Huntington, Tennessee. We've all been there, been through there, by there. That school's not there any longer, but it's called Southern Normal School. It was a big normal school because it had law and education. So he received law degrees. He received a degree in education. He was there from about 1890. If you do the math, 15 years old. 1890 to 1898. Later, he received a law degree from the University of Kentucky in 1927 at 52 as well. He married Tennessee Daniel, Tenny. They had 3 children. He lived in Edgewood, which still exists today as Oakhurst. And it's still the home of university presidents and is a beautiful, wonderful facility, and I'm sure everyone here has been in it. So the early roots, Dr. Wells, Murray State was not his first venture into education. Callaway Normal College was. So who's heard of Callaway Normal College? Hopefully several. Yes. It's in Kirksey. If you go through Kirksey, you'll see a Kentucky historical marker about the Callaway Normal College. He founded it when he was in 1899. He was 24 years old. He didn't stay there long, a few years. He didn't stay there long. He ran the school, he taught. He was, again, really concerned about teachers, the quality of education, and it really impacted young people who wanted to be teachers in Callaway, Marshall, Graves. It didn't go very far. It didn't have a lot of students, and most of them were really centered in about a 50-mile radius. He moved to Murray to practice law. Callaway Normal College closed in 1913. Dr. Wells was also a legislator. He was the state tax commissioner, was in charge of the state tax commission, a very powerful position at that time. Doesn't exist today. Very powerful position. Actually, the state tax commissioner had taxing authority. And so he and the commission, outside the legislative process, could place taxes on the citizens of the Commonwealth. So a lot of authority. Again, it doesn't exist today. So because of this position, his positions that he had, he built a network of statewide contacts, and that's going to serve him well later, right? So he built this network. He knew exactly, very methodically, what he was doing. He knew he would find his opportunity at some point in time. Here's the marker. Go to Kirksey and sometime and look at it. That was probably, some could argue, the predecessor to Murray State University. That was his vision. That was his vision. And he modeled it much after the early early days of this institution. So, what happened in 1920? The General Assembly was charged with a responsibility, and they issued a report in 1921. But in 1920, they formed an education commission. Governor Edwin Morrill, a Republican, who was elected in 1919, so brand new governor, was looking for how he could advance education, especially in rural Kentucky. Okay? So he determined with the commission we needed 2 new sites, one in the far eastern part of the state, one in the far western part of the state. We needed, quote, more and better teacher training schools. So this was the theme of the legislature, the governor, and hence Dr. Wells saw an opportunity. So the report stated it, the governor stated it, the legislative leadership stated it. So he was preparing himself to chase this new normal school for this particular region, but hoping specifically it would be in Murray, Kentucky. Towns in the Pennyroyal and Purchase all expressed interest. Benton, Clinton, Hopkinsville, Mayfield, Murray, Owensboro, Paducah, Princeton. I talked to the Henderson Rotary Club not too long ago, and somebody raised their hand and said, and Henderson too. And actually, they presented me an old newspaper article where they were chasing this new normal school, which I did not know as well. Because it's on the far eastern part of this region, and it's pretty isolated itself, as you know, bordering Indiana. But great history. Many of these communities wanted it. If you go back and research the newspapers, some thought they wanted it more than they really did, and that's no disrespect to any of these communities. I know them all and love them all. Many of them I represented in the state senate once upon a time, and some of them know how the citizens of these communities are worried about what college students might do to their community. Okay, I worry about that every day. George and I talk about it all, but we can say it tongue in cheek. They were really serious about it at that point in time. So let me jump to here for a second. Who's heard of Representative Lee Clark? Good students. Thank you. Mr. Patterson, I can always count on you. I've never thought that Representative Clark received the credit that he deserved. And there's another person I'm going to talk about in a moment who I don't think received the credit he deserved. So Clark College, Murray State, Clark Hall, named after Representative Lee Clark. In his years after the legislature, he was the postmaster on campus, and he had other duties as assigned by Dr. Wells. They were very close and close allies governmentally. He served in the legislature 2 different times. The reason, this had never been printed before as far as we can tell and know. I wish you can't read that. This was his campaign poster. Back in the 20s. I think it's hilarious. I recognize that one of the most important questions that will come before the next General Assembly will be, not education, will be the temperance question or the submission of the statewide amendment about alcohol. I've gotten a kick out of that poster, and so we published it in the book, and that was his campaign poster, probably for his first campaign. That sounds like a first campaign statement. Governor Morrill was a very, very good governor, thoughtful, far-seeing himself. He gave a speech to the legislature, and you can read it here. I'm not going to read this to you, but I want to point out a couple sentences. Still true today. Many of us still say it today. Education is an investment. Ignorance is a tax. That's still true today. Every legislature needs to read that. This Republican governor's speech to the General Assembly at that point in time. So I'm not making political statements when I say Democrat or Republican in regard to this. It's just how different the times were and how concerned they were in regard to education in the rural parts of this Commonwealth. So Senator Brigg Harris, he was from Ashland, far eastern Kentucky, filed Senate Bill 14. Senate Bill 14 is the legislative document that created these two new normal schools. Remember that photo for a second, because I'm going to talk about a county-wide canvass in just a moment. And this was the canvass crew. I'll touch on that in just a second. So what were the next steps? I mean, again, Dr. Wells saw an opportunity. He went to work very aggressively, had a lot of contacts, held a prominent position in Frankfort. So he started a major campaign. March 8th, 1922, he started a major campaign. And in 1 month, in the month of March of 1922, he did what's called a county-wide canvass. Now, ministers use canvass still today, right? Mm-hmm. So in Burton, in the church world, we've talked about canvasses in our respective churches. Well, he called it a county-wide canvass. He was a very active Methodist at First Methodist here in Murray, and that's a Methodist term. It's used often. We would call it a campaign today. He raised $117,000 in that month. That would be approximately $1.8 million today. With recent inflation, I didn't update it, Gil, but it would probably be $2+ million now. But a lot of money, especially in 1922. There were 1,352 donors. They gave from $1 to $2,500. A tough way to raise $117,000, $1, $5, $10 at a time. Most of them were gifts such as that. Two banks, the Bank of Murray, which doesn't exist any longer, guaranteed the pledges, along with First National Bank, a predecessor to People's Bank, but the original First National Bank failed during the Depression. And the assets were bought out at that time and renamed, but that bank failed, as well as others in Callaway County at that point in time. There were a number of banks. I think there were 7 or 8 banks in Callaway County at that time, believe it or not. Some are very small. Lynn Grove had a bank, I'm told. And I found that somewhere in a newspaper article as well as we were doing this research. This is the First National Bank, located near where People's Bank was located, City Hall now. And so again, it failed during the Great Depression. But that's what it looked like. I love this picture too. This is not the Murray Hotel. This is the new Murray Hotel. And can anyone tell where that is today?
That's Main and Fifth.
Main and Fifth, thank you. Main and Fifth, that's right. So it's same place as today. So you can see the street. If there's any gravel on that particular street, there's not much. And you can see there's a car or two there. One thing I found interesting, Murray was very progressive as a city. Had municipal water, it's a fire hydrant. And one of the reasons we were able to get Murray State University here at the time, our Western State Normal School initially, was because of its people, its progressive activities, its good decision making, and all of those things. We'll touch on it in just a second. So the commission decided. They decided on May 31, 1922. Dr. Wells made the presentation on behalf of this community, and he asked to go last. A wise man. Always want to go last. He went last. And he said, I have something no one else had. No one else presented. Everyone had gone in front of him, so he got to hear every presentation. It's not what the people of Murray promised to do, but what they've already done that counts. So he presented, the only community to do this, he presented 2 checks totaling $100,000 to start the campus. 2 $50,000 checks. He also had secured, now you got to remember, March is when he went to work, basically, just a couple of months prior to this. He has secured 350 homes, commitments from homes to house up to 2,000 students in rooms and homes in and around and near what he envisioned as campus. And I'll show you what campus looked like at that time. They had purchased 18 acres. Now, the easy part of that is he owned a lot of that land. Okay? So he owned the 18 acres, and there was an option for 12 more around Edgewood, Oakhurst. He had worked with Murray City Schools, Murray High School, now Murray Middle School, on Main Street to secure classrooms for the new normal school. So he had thought of really all of these different pieces, and no one else had. And on Friday, September 17th, the commission deliberated for a few months. You can tell that Murray was chosen as Western State Normal School, then Murray State Normal School, and then ultimately Murray State University. Here's the other gentleman that I've never thought received the credit that he deserved for building this place. So when the decision was made on May 31, September 17th, and the presentations were prior to that, they had to go to work very quickly. Okay? They had just been awarded a normal school, so they had to go to work very quickly. Dr. Carr was not hired until August 1 of 1923. Okay? He was hired as the first president. Now, there's not a lot written on this. Some of it's my own speculation. Some of it is stories told to me by Wells Lovett. Anyone remember Wells Lovett? Longtime board member. Bill, I know you do, and Dr. Rose does. Longtime board member, yep, from Owensboro. Prominent attorney. He was Rainey T. Wells' grandson. He was born in Oakhurst. And so he had a deep love in history. He's dead now. We miss him. He was just a wealth of information. So he always told me that his grandfather wanted to be the president, first president, and got it here, located it here, got it funded here, wanted to be, but he didn't get to be. So the state as a whole, and probably some of his influence had waned maybe just a bit. This is some of my speculation. Dr. Carr was the first president. Now, Dr. Carr was originally from Indiana, and he had worked through several states in K through 12 roles, no higher ed type roles, K through 12 roles. He was in Pennsylvania for a while. I think he was in Ohio for a while, but he made it to Kentucky. And he was in the Department of Education as the state supervisor of high schools in the Department of Education in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And that is Dr. Carr. So the Paducah Sun Democrat in 1959, and I love this quote. When he, Dr. Carr, arrived in the summer of 1923, he was the only visible asset that Murray State Normal School had. There was no building, no faculty, there was no students, there were no facilities, there was nothing. There was a cornfield. He had to visualize and get to work quickly. So this was already 1923 when he landed here in September. First classes occurred on September 24th, about a month later. Now, a lot of that groundwork had already been laid by Dr. Rainey T. Wells, but he had a lot of work to do. And he had nothing really to start with other than the groundwork and the monies that had been provided by Dr. Wells. Mr. Smith was our first faculty member hired. So, point of that is, classes started a month later, he had to hire faculty. Kathy, you and I know, and many others in here, how hard it is to find and hire faculty in any discipline. He was a math teacher. He was from Wingo, and he taught math, and I think he was the principal of Wingo High School, just from memory on the research. But we opened our doors in Murray High School, now Murray Middle School, with 202 students on September 24th, 1923. So go back to Dr. Wells for just a moment and Dr. Carr. They were very close, actually. They became close. So once he was appointed president, Dr. Carr knew he needed Dr. Wells, governmentally and otherwise, locally, regionally, especially because of all the contacts that he had. And Dr. Wells knew he needed Dr. Carr. He was the academician. I mean, he was going to get this started academically, and really deep down he knew that. And his turn would come, and it came fairly quickly. Joseph & Joseph was a prominent engineering architectural firm based in Louisville. This was the first architectural rendering designed by Joseph & Joseph for the Murray State Normal School. And what's interesting, it's really campus today. So I mean, this is how we built campus. Rabbit, Wilson, Poe, Wells, Lovett. And this was before any building was built. So they honored the architectural rendering. They had a vision. I mean, can you imagine you had a cornfield and you're trying to figure out how to build a university and how they designed out all of this. It's just wonderful, unique, special, just neat history of this place that I would argue many institutions didn't start this way and didn't have this type of visionary leadership from the very beginning. Our first Board of Regents came soon thereafter. So Dr. Wells was not president, Dr. Carr was, but Laureen Wells Lovett, his daughter, Lovett Auditorium, was on the first board. She married a gentleman from Benton. They lived in Benton, Thomas Stokes, Murray, a major donor to this initiative, Murray businessman and banker at the Bank of Murray. Prentice Thomas from Katie's. Anybody remember old Hopkinsville Federal that was located downtown? You remember Bruce Thomas? Yeah. Bruce passed away during the pandemic, but he came to see me in 2019 and provided a gift, which will be a gift of the universities going forward. But he had every president, because of his family. This was his, I think it was his grandfather, if I remember right. It was either his great uncle or grandfather. Every president had signed this print, and it's in Oakhurst now. And so he had me sign it that particular day. It may have been fall 2018. So that's a great piece of history from Prentice Thomas. James Wilson was from Mayfield. Dr. McHenry Rhodes, Jerry Rhodes, who was on our board for a long time. Senator Jerry Rhodes from Madisonville. This is a distant relative of Senator Rhodes. He's not pictured here. Dr. McHenry Rhodes was the state school superintendent, and he was chair by virtue of his position, and that's how boards were structured at that point in time. This is Rather Hall, soon after it was completed. Still work to be done, as you can see from landscaping and otherwise. And John, I don't see any blacktop. So those were the streets in and around campus. Our first senior class. So this was Murray State Teachers College, first senior class. Most of the early students here stayed for a couple of years, some not even that long, only 1 year. You could teach in the rural schools, the one-room schoolhouses with a 1 year or 2 year degree. So April 1, 1926, Dr. Carr had been in the job about 3 years. And he wrote this letter to the board. I'll let you read it. I quote, as Jordan knows, a lot of this often when I'm speaking to different groups. 3 years after he was appointed. Now this is my speculation. There's nothing written on this, but he had severe health problems. He worked himself to death. Forming this school, building these buildings, recruiting students, starting from nothing. So after 3 years, he went to the board and said, I would like to retire from this position, and I want to be dean of the university, would be the provost today, and I want Dr. Rainey T. Wells to be president and replace me. And the board acted, and they did. They honored that very powerful position, Dr. Carr. They honored his wishes. He was on this campus for many years thereafter in a very different role, focused on building the early academic programs of this institution. And Dr. Wells became the second president of Murray State. So we're grateful to the University Press of Kentucky. You can find this book on Amazon, the Murray State Bookstore, the Kentucky Press site. There's a Centennial exhibit in Rather West Kentucky Museum if you would like to stop in and see some of this early history too. As an example, the family of Rainey T. Wells in the fall of 2018, when I came into this position, gave me a gift. They gave me Rainey T. Wells' fountain pen, and that he signed these early documents with. It's in wonderful shape. You know, it's not in the museum today. When we shut the museum down from last fall, we had a special exhibit. You may remember I removed that pen. And at some point in time, I will make sure it's gifted to this university as well. But his family kept his ink pen for all these years, almost 100 years. And so a lot of wonderful history. That's the early part. That's really my favorite part of how these things happen, why they happen, who makes them happen. Nothing, these wonderful buildings that we build, the students that are recruited on this campus, these things don't just happen. And I know especially my colleagues here, chairs and professors, retired professors, et cetera, know that. And the community knows that too. They don't just happen. Someone's got to make these things happen. And Dr. Wells made these things happen. Dr. Carr made these things happen. And a board and a lot of other supportive individuals who gave money and raised money. And that's how universities advance. And that's still the way they're advanced today. And it's spending, Jordan, a lot of time in Frankfurt or Washington and finding those monies. Thank goodness the roads are blacktop and the bridges exist, and you can get to Frankfurt now in only 4 hours, not 2 days. The book is done by eras, so don't think it's all old history like we've described. I love the old beginning history, but it talks about the Great Depression and what happened during that period of time, desegregation, when that occurred, how it occurred, who was involved in that. It talks about the war years, so there's a lot on the war years. It's got Price Doyle's, I don't think it's ever been published anywhere either, Price Doyle's ration card and ration book. Now there's actually a book because at that point in time you could only get so much of anything, including professors and staff and administrators at Murray State. So it goes through today. You'll see John Moran toward the end, and a lot of our most recent history at the end, and how this university has evolved from really a teacher's college to an extremely comprehensive, high-quality institution, nationally recognized, and we're all proud of that, and what it means to the region, what it means to this community. So, hey, I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate the invitation.